Hey guys, welcome back to the Learn to Play series. Tonight we're going to be covering a very popular game, the Third World War. And the presenter for tonight is Greg Warren. He's one of the development team members for the Third World War project. So sit down, grab a drink, and enjoy the latest Learn to Play session. Over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Mo. Well, welcome to our Third World War Learn to Play. We're going to concentrate a little bit on Battle for Germany, and we're going to narrow it down even more and kind of head down to the Pact Central Group of Forces, kind of across from the U.S. 7 Corps, and then other assorted NATO units down there. So we're going to concentrate in that area. We'll go through some of the air war and a little of everything. Well, to get us going, the first thing we do in Third World War, if you're playing the Europe maps, you have NATO forward movement, which allows NATO units in Germany, not on the border, to possibly do movement based on their die roll. If you're playing the combined game with the Persian Gulf, there the Soviets get a choice of whether to do an early attack or not. If they do an early attack, there's no forward movement. If they just do a regular attack, there is forward movement. But for our purposes, we're just looking at the battle for Germany, so we're going to assume that NATO has forward movement. So how forward movement works, just roll a 6-sided die, add 3 to it. If that number is equal or less than the proficiency of the unit, which is the third number on the counter at the bottom, then they get forward movement. What I tend to do is I try to start with the guys near the front line, near the border, because that way then I can kind of see where the guys in back need to fill in a little bit. All right, so we're going to start with forward movement here, and we're going to start with the U.S. 1st Armored Division. It's in Hex 1715. We're going to roll. We get a 2. So 2 plus 3 is 5. 5 is less than 7, so we get forward movement for him. So we're going to move him right up to the border there at 1716. Next, we're going to look at the German 12th Panzer Division. Right behind him, we're going to roll for him 3. 3 plus 3 is 6. Less than or equal to 7. So we're going to move him up also. But we're just going to go up a couple hexes. We're not going to go in here because it's real easy to get surrounded by 5 Pact units, and you're kind of in trouble there. So we're just going to move him up that far. The U.S. 7th Attack Helicopter Brigade. We're going to roll for them. We get a 6. 6 plus 3 is 9. So nope, they don't get to move. For Vassal, and you may want to do this in the game, turn your counter after you move them or roll to move. That way you know who's gone and who hasn't. But I'm going to go on and mark him moved. And then we'll go to our 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. And we'll roll for him and another 6. So he's not going anywhere either. So we'll mark him moved. So those guys are moved. Working our way down, the 4th West German Panzer Grenadier Division. We get a 5. Okay, we're not wanting the high rolls now. So 8's more than 7, so he's not going anywhere. West German 2nd Attack Helicopter Regiment. He rolls a 4. 4 plus 3, 7. So he's good. He'll move forward. And we're going to go up right up here at about 1316. Then we're going to kind of use this minor river. If everyone's attacking across the minor river, it's a 1 column shift. So we're going to take advantage of that. The West German 1st Geb Panzer Grenadier Division. 1, yes, he gets to move up. And so he's going to kind of go up here, right on the Austria border, behind the minor river, and set up camp there. We're going to skip this guy. The paratroop guys, they can do a Airborne Assault, so we're going to leave him here, but I'm going to go on and mark him move just because, so we don't forget. And I'll do it here for the 25th Brigade. All right, 10th Panzer Division. A 5? Nope, he's not going anywhere. 5 plus 3 is 8. And the Canadians, a 2. Yes, he gets to move. All right, so movement, each unit has 6 movement points. Basically, in this area, most of the hexes are 1. Your woods plus rough right here in front of him in hex 1409, that's 2 movement points for mechanized and motorized. All leg units are pretty much 2 movement points per hex. So we're going to move him. We got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he's going to get up here to Hex 1413. France 3rd Armored Division. We're going to roll 2. 2 plus 3 is 5. So we're good to move him. Same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Second Attack Helicopter Regiment, we're going to roll for him, and another 6. So he's going to stay right where he is. Underneath him, the 2nd Armored Cavalry Brigade, roll a 2. Yep, he gets to move. We're going to kind of move up here, kind of towards Warsaw, get behind these divisions up here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the U.S. 8th Mechanized Division. All right, so he's going to head up to 2112. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3 across the river, 4, and then we've got another woods plus rough, so 5, 6. He's going to go right there. The French 1st Armored Division. This is one of the things, he's on one of the POMCUS units, the pre-positioned overseas material configured in unit sets for the US. We're going to leave him here because one of the things, if a Pact unit hits the POMCUS, it destroys the unit. So, these are divisions and there's one armored cavalry regiment. So we're going to leave him here to keep him covered. So we're going to mark him moved. We're going to do the same here with the 3rd Armored Cavalry and the 1st Mechanized Division. We're going to roll for him. 4 plus 3, 7. So we're good. We're going to head up straight ahead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And actually, I think we're going to come down here a little bit. So to 18, 11. So he's good. The 3rd, we're going to roll for him. Roll a 5. 5 plus 3. Nope, he's not going anywhere. And the 5th Attack Helicopter Brigade. And another 6. So he's not going anywhere. All right, so we've done NATO forward movement. So that's what we do first. The next thing on the sequence of play is the neutral activation phase. So we need to pull our markers for the neutrals, which are Austria and Yugoslavia in this game. And so we'll go up here to our neutral diplomacy. I've already pulled them over. Now, in this, the Pact player won't see what this is. The NATO player will pull these and look at it. So Austria, we've pulled. We're going to flip it. And he's going to go to NATO on turn 3. Yugoslavia, we've pulled him over, and he's going to be neutral. So he's not going to enter the war unless the Soviets decide to invade. Would also have the diplomacy phase, which only occurs in the Persian Gulf or the combined game. We're now to the neutral activation phase. Since nobody had a turn 1, so NATO isn't going to say anything about any of their neutrals, and the Pact's going to decide they're not going to invade Yugoslavia at this point, or Austria. If they want to invade during this turn, they need to announce it at this time. And so the Pact isn't going to invade. Next on the sequence is the aircraft maintenance phase. This, we can skip the first turn. This is where you'd receive new air units, roll for maintenance, destroy and ground aircraft due to craters or grounding, repair craters, and consolidate losses. So we're going to skip that for now, and we're going to go to the weather determination phase. All right, so the weather. We're going to roll basically a 1, 2, 3, or 4 means clear weather. A 5 or 6 means poor weather, and then you'll roll again, and you can have anything from overcast to storms to severe storms. And each of those, the poor weather conditions, have different limitations that places on your air units. And so we're going to roll for the Western Europe theater first, and we get a 3, so that's clear, so we can leave that marker where it is. The Southwest, we will roll here, and we get a 6. So that means they have poor weather. So we make a second roll, and we get a 5, and that means storms. So we're going to flip our counter to the storm side. The next phase is the nuclear restraint phase. We're not doing nuclear, so we're going to skip over that. The next one is the theater air superiority phase. So what we're going to do here, this is where the different sides allocate their units to air superiority missions. The Pact goes first. That's to have a representation of the NATO AWACS capability. So this allows NATO to react to what the Pact did. And I'm going to start here in the Southwest Theater. Now, since we have a storm, that means that only units with an all-weather rating, which would be anything with the black or some of the counters, it's a white outline values in a bubble. So over here for the Soviets, we've got one unit that can go to air superiority. So we're going to move him there. Same for NATO, modern day F-104 starfighters. We're going to move them up to air superiority. And so that's where our air superiority is. Now, the way air superiority is determined is whoever has the most units in the air superiority box has air superiority. So we're tied 1-1. So we're going to flip this to contested. And what contested means, or if you don't have air superiority, means you only get to use one air unit for each of your air missions. The side with air superiority can use 2 air units. And so we'll move up to the Western Theater. One of the things that to me is, and this is more a strategy tip, is the Pact really needs to have air superiority on turn 1. So we're going to look at NATO, and if we count, they have 24 units that have an air superiority factor. That would be everything, including the F-111, other than the Harrier and the A-10s. As a Pact, we want to guarantee we have air superiority. And actually, I miscounted. NATO has 23, so we need 24. So there's our 24 units for air superiority for the Pact. That leaves us 17s, 20s, and 25s, our bomber to carry out some of our air missions. Next, we'll move over to the NATO side, and we're going to move pretty much everybody up there. One of the reasons being the Pact ends up doubling up on every air mission. They're going to run out of air superiority units. So what we'll do is we'll get a pretty good number in there again. That gives us 18 for air superiority. So I think we're going to stop there. We're going to leave these these West German F4s and obviously the A-10s and Harriers and the F-111s here in the available box to run our missions. Next, we go to the deep strike phase. Part of the first turn surprise effects is NATO cannot run any strike missions in the first game turn. They can only carry out ground attack missions. So we're going to skip that. But the way the deep strikes work is Pact assigns their strikes and their escorts. NATO then would intercept and assign any deep strikes, which we can't do the first turn. Then the Pact can go back and intercept the NATO strike missions. So we're going to do that now. And what we're going to do, I like running a lot of runway cratering missions in the first turn if you're the Pact, because if you can knock out or ground some of these NATO units, there's a chance you can have air superiority during turn 2. So the way we'll do this, the Pact will announce all of their missions, and we're just going to run through one. There would be others, and I'm just going to do this right here on the air theater display because these don't go to any specific hex or any location on the map. So we're going to take our TU-160. He's gonna fly the mission, and we're going to go on and escort him with an SU-27 because we want somebody with a 5. And we're going to throw in one of our lowly MiG-27s as our second unit. So this, in the air missions, if you allocate 2 missions for escort or top cover, you're guaranteed to get your strike or ground attack unit in through the target. Now, they may be aborted or shot down or halved by air defense fire, but this will guarantee they're at least through to the target. So NATO here, we're going to go on and intercept. We're going to go on and we'll use an F-15 as well. So we've got 2 air superiority 5 units, an F-15 and an Su-27, and then a 1 MiG-27. So round 1, if the air superiority values are the same, air combat occurs at the same time. Otherwise, it would be highest to lowest. So if we had, say we had one of our F-16s in here for NATO, the Su-27 would fire first, then the F-16, and the MiG-27. So we're going to do the F-15 and Su-27 at the same time. All right, so we're going to go on and start our air combat. So the F-15 attacking the Su-27, he rolls a 1. That's an H or a half result. So that would half the air superiority rating of the other unit. But since this is simultaneous, this doesn't occur at this point. So we're going to roll for the Su-27 versus the F-15, and we get a 2. That's an A result. So that means he is aborted, which means he would go back to the flown box after this mission is carried out. We do have the MiG-27. He gets a second shot for the Pact at the F-15, so he's going to roll on the 1 column of the air combat table, and he gets a 6. That means abort, so the F-15 is going to be aborted. So that is all for round 1. All right. So round two only happens if there are no escort or top cover units with the strike aircraft. That's not the case here, so there's no round two of air combat. So we're going to move these guys back to the flown box. All right, so they're back in the flown box. TU-160 is going to carry out his strike, and we'll roll on the air defense fire table. This is for RC, runway cratering. And so we're going to roll and we get a 6. So he's shot down and halved. This is when the NATO wanted the high rolls. So they're getting him here. But shot down and halved means he still gets to carry out his mission. So he's going to get 3 strikes for runway cratering. And so the way runway cratering works is a 4 or 5 creates a crater on the runway, a 6 destroys a unit on the runway. So he'll get 3 rolls instead of his 6. So not quite what we wanted for the Pact, but it's at least he's getting through and getting 3 shots at it. So we will roll. We get a 1, a 4, and a 6. So no crater for the 1. We get a crater for the 4, and we get a destroyed on runway for the 6. So we have 1 destroyed on runway, 1 crater, and then we will move our TU-160, and he's going to go into the shot down box since he has been shot down. The other deep strike mission that can occur at this point are logistical strikes, and we're not going to carry any of those out right now. That basically eliminates supply for opposing units. But at this point, we would be running a bunch of runway cratering missions for the Pact. We're going to only show this one mission for now, but we'll assume that some others are occurring as well. The last step of the initial segment is the critical loss determination phase. Obviously, we haven't started any combat yet, so no nations are going to have critical losses at this point. So we are going to skip this one, and we will move to the Pact segment. A couple things that happen first. We've got the Black Sea Fleet sortie phase, the Norwegian Sea control phase. Those don't occur in this one. Black Sea is in the southern front, Norwegian Sea is in the Arctic front. And then we have the strike interdiction phase. The way we do here is we remove strike markers left from the last turn. Obviously, there aren't any. And so we will start much like we did with the deep strikes. We're going to do some strike interdiction missions. And so these do fly to a specific location on the map. And so what we're going to do, we're going to run 1. We'll have an Su-25 here, and he's going to run an attack on hex 1808 because we're going to try to do some damage here to the take a gamble that maybe this Pomkus unit will appear in turn 1. And that way he will get attacked by the strike, as well as the first armor division for the French. So we will move him there. We're going to escort him with a MiG-29 and another MiG-27. And NATO is going to intercept. We're going to use one of our French Mirage 2000s. So we're going to put him there. And this will go pretty much like the deep strike phase. So round 1, the Mirage and the MiG will both shoot at the same time. The MiG-27 will fire last. So first we'll do the Mirage 2000 versus the MiG-29. He rolls a 2. MiG-29's halved. And since they're simultaneous, he still gets to go with his full value. So we're on the 4 column, MiG-29 and Mirage 2000. He gets a 6. So that's shot down immediately. All right, so then we will get our MiG-27 to get a shot at the Mirage 2000. He's got a 1, so we'll roll on the 1 column. We get a 4, no effect. So nothing happens there. So our Mirage 2000 goes to the shot down box. So there's no round 2 of air combat. So these guys are going to head back to the flown box. All right, so now that we've sent our units back to the flown box, we're going to do air defense fire. So we will do air defense fire on the SI column. We roll a 4 there, no effect. So nothing happens. He's going to get through. So he will use his 2 strike rating. So we place our Pact strike marker on our hex, and we will go on and raise our strike level to 2. And so what we do now, each unit in the hex, we will roll for a disruption twice. So when we roll, if we get a 5 or a 6, that unit is disrupted. we get a 2 and a 6. So we've got 1 disruption on our French unit. We will reduce his proficiency. Move that strike marker out of the way so you can see it. So his proficiency is down to a 5 from the 6 where he started at. And so we will move our Su-25 back to the flown box. Normally, we'd probably do a few other strikes, but we're not going to do it at this point, and then we will go on and move on. So the Pact first impulse. The Pact impulses are split up into 2 echelons. So we will start with the first one. We start with the movement phase. So what we do with the movement phase, the first thing we do is receive new ground units. So we're going to do that. We're going to go on and bring in our new units. Now, normally the Pact would have 8 units coming on. We're just going to bring on 3 that are kind of in this theater. So we're going to get them lined up. And so next we will move to the movement phase to continue the movement phase. So here we move our units. We can do airborne assaults, naval transport. So we will start there. One of the first things we're going to do an airborne assault with the Czech Airborne Brigade. And so we are going to try to move to hex 1715. So we're going to try to get here. If this is successful, that'll isolate the 1st Armored Division, which would mean a -1 proficiency for him. So we're going to do this pretty much the same way as we did the strike missions. All right, so the Pact's decided they're only going to send 1 unit with this mission. NATO's countering with the Tornado G, so they're sending their 1 unit. So we're going to fire simultaneously. We're going to do the MiG-23 first at the Tornado. They're both rolling on the 3 column. So he rolls a 2, no effect. The Tornado G rolls a 6, shot down in half. So that means he would normally be able to carry out his mission, but since it's the first round, he's going to go back into the flown box. All right, so here's where we go start with round 2. So round 2, there's no escort left with this airborne brigade, and so the Tornado gets to attack the airborne brigade. He's going to roll again on the 3 column. Now in the second round, you get a +1 on your die roll. So he will roll on the 3 column. He gets a 3, +1 is a 4. So that means abort. So he will return to where he started from. So he's back there, no disruptions or anything. If this would have been a shot down halved or a shot down immediately, that would eliminate the division. So he's just going to stay where he is, and we will move the Tornado back to the flown box. All right, so now we'll start moving our units. And we're just going to kind of work from nearer the top to the bottom. And so we're going to start here with this stack of the 6th Guard and 7th Guard tank divisions. So we're going to move. We're just going to move here. Now, what happens is for a zone of control, you actually have to add 1 movement point to the hex, and that's for either entering or leaving a zone of control. So this unit with the red stacking number indicates that it has an airborne zone of control, which is a little bit higher. So that means it's 2 movement points to move in or out of that zone of control. So we're going to move him. So it'll be 1 into 816 and then +2 for the zone of control. So that'll be 3. He can't move any farther because it would be 2 for leaving the zone of control in this hex, 2 for entering the zone of control in this hex, and then 2 for the woods plus rough. So that'd be 9. Obviously, we can't do that because he's only got 6 movement points to use. All right, the 31st Tank Division, we're just going to leave him there. We'll move down here to some of the checks. The 1st Tank Division, the 2nd Motorized Rifle Division. We're going to move those guys. We're going to go up. All right, so we got 1 +1 for the zone of control. It's a standard zone of control with the black stacking. And I think we can go 1 more. So we're going to be 1 to leave the zone of control, 1 to enter it in the next hex, and 1 for the hex. So that would be 5. So he can move to there. All right, this guy, we're just going to move 1 hex. We've got another airborne zone of control. So that'll be 2 to move there, but obviously we can't move much farther than that. Okay, and so we're going to take this stack and move them, but we're going to kind of come around the top. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. and then 5, 6, because we're going into the zone of control plus there, so that's our 6. We've also got our reinforcements back here, so we will move them. Our 8th Guards Tank Army Air Mobile Division, he's going to go, actually we're going to have him come in over here. So we're going to go 1 for the first X, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The symbols on the top left I should have talked about earlier. The diamond is a leg mobile. The square is a motorized. The circle is an mechanized. And the triangle is an airborne. So those are the 3 different classes of movement. And so there's a different column on the terrain effects chart, which will show the value for movement for each of those types of units. All right, so we're going to move our 16th Army unit, 1, 2, 3. Actually, we're going to come in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And our 23rd, we're going to move. We're going to come in down here as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that takes care of our movement for the first sub-impulse in the Pact first impulse. So after movement, next we go to the combat phase. All right, so I moved this guy, the first armor division, into the wrong hex. He was going to come up here into this woods plus rough hex, a little bit more of a defensive, and he still had enough movement points to get there. So we're going to correct that and move him back up into his hex. All right, so the way the combat phase works is we're going to have to declare any of the attacks that we're going to make. The way to do this basically is to look at your units and figure out what your odds would be. The way I play it is, if you place an odds marker onto the units being attacked, that means you are declaring that attack, and it has to happen. So our first attack, and you'll lay these all out declare them all first, and then you can carry them out in any order you choose. So our first one we're going to look at are these guys. We've got the 25th and the 207th, the East Germans and the Soviets, and some more Soviet tank division, motorized rifle, and air mobile. All right, so we're going to total all those up. We get 65 for the attackers versus 5. So that's going to be a 13-to-1 ratio. We also have to adjust for proficiency. We have a 7 here for the US unit. Now, if it's between 0 and 2, there's a 1-column shift in favor of whoever has the higher proficiency. That increases 2 to 4, 2-column shift, 4 to 6, 3-column shift, and more than 6, 4-column shift. But we don't really have to calculate it all for these guys because we know he's a 7. We've got 6s and 7s. So you can tell that the proficiencies, it's more than 0, but it's less than 2 for the difference. So it's going to be a 1-column shift. So we're going to place an odds marker there. All right, our next attack, we're going to go on and attack this first armored division. We've got 3 stacks around it. So we're going to total up our Pact units. Some more 12s. So we're going to come up with 79 on the attackers versus a 15 to the defenders. So that's going to give us a 5-to-1 ratio. Again, we're going to have the 1-column shift for proficiency. Also, he's in a woods plus rough. So on the terrain effects chart, woods plus rough means another column shift. So we've gone from a 5-to-1 to a 3-to-1. And so we will place the odds marker there. And then we're going to come down here and attack the 4th West German Panzer Grenadier Division. We're going to total up our attackers. We get 66 to 10. So that would be a 6-to-1. He's in a minor city. So that's a 1-column shift. We're also, all of the units are attacking across the minor river. So that's another 1-column shift. So we've got our 65 to 10. That's 6-to-1. So we've got 1-column shift for proficiency, 1 for the minor city, 1 for all attacking across the minor river. So this is going to give us another 3-to-1 odds. So we've declared all our attacks, and we can carry them out in any order that we choose. So the Pact, we're going to start at this first one. Now on the CRT, the 10-to-1 column, 10-to-1 or anything above, the only possible result is defender eliminated. So probably our 11th Armored Cavalry Division or Armored Cavalry Regiment is going to be a sacrificial lamb, and he's probably going to go away. We're not going to supply any ground attack missions since he's in a woods hex. Air missions are halved, so even if we would use the A10 with a 4 ground attack rating, that would be a 2-column shift. So I'd take that 13-1 down to 11-1. So it's just not worth allocating any air units for this. So he's going to be eliminated. All right, so he's gone. So once a unit in an attack vacates a hex, at least one of the attacking units has to move into that hex. Now, more than one can move in, and you can also advance 2 hexes, basically if it's in clear or woods terrain. Pretty much any other type of terrain, woods plus rough, those are limited to just a 1 hex advance. We're going to go on and move this guy up 1. And so he will advance there. So we'll move down to our next one. We do have a 3-1 combat odds. So we're going to look at this and decide if we're going to add any air. And so Pact is going to provide some air. We'll pull up our air theater display again. So the Pact is going to use a let's go with a MiG-29, and I'm just going to kind of put these on the map somewhere. We know we're supporting this hex. We're going to go with an Su-24, also for air superiority. So then for the ground attack mission, we're going to take one of our Su-25s because he's got a potential 3-column shift. So we will move him, and so then Nato gets to counter. And they're going to use another French Mirage 2000. And they're going to go on and use the Harrier. A 3-3 would cancel each other out if they both go through. We'll try that. Now we are attacking into a woods hex, so woods would be halved. You do get to round up. So each of those would be a 2-2, so still evened up. All right, so we've got our ratio of 3-1. So we're going to carry out our air combat. So again, we're going to have the MiG-29 and the Mirage 2000 fire simultaneously. The MiG-29 attacking the Mirage on the 4 column. We get a 1, so that's no effect. The Mirage 2000 versus the MiG-29, we get a 6. That's shot down immediately. And then we still get our Su-24 against the Mirage 2000. This is a 1 air superiority rating, so we're going to roll. Get a 2, no effect there. So nothing happens in this round with those guys. So we will then move our other air superiority units back to the flown box. And so now we will do air defense fire. So the air defense fire will roll for the Su-25 first in the GA column. So we'll roll there. We get a 2 and no effect. And the Harrier, same column, we roll a 4, no effect. All right, so basically those two are going to cancel each other out. Really no effect on the odds that we have. So we are going to send those back to the flown boxes. All right, so since that attack is done, we will roll on the 3-1 column. Everything's figured up. The other step before you roll for the final odds, you need to check for isolation because depending on how retreats and advance after attack goes, you could have a unit that wasn't isolated initially, ends up being isolated after those retreats and advances. So, but we can see still he's not isolated. And isolated means you can't trace a line of communication basically back to the western map edge for the NATO units. All right, so 3-1, we get a 1. So everybody is disrupted. So we will reduce the proficiency of all of the units involved in the attack. Now the Pact, we'll get into this in the regroup phase, but for the Pact, once they lose their first proficiency, they can't gain that back. They will never go back to their full proficiency. NATO units can return to their full proficiency. And this is just a reflection of how replacements and reinforcements would work with units, looking at the various doctrines of the NATO and the Pact, and that's the mechanism to do that. So we will move on to our last one. So another 3-1. And we're going to add some air units to this one as well. All right, so we have our air units. The Pact is only going to send one escort for this mission, or one top cover. So that's going to be our MiG-23, providing cover for the Su-17. We're going to have an F-15E providing top cover for A-10. We'll go on and start with our air combat. For the first round, we have a 4 for the F-15 and a 3 for the MiG-23. So the F-15 will fire first. He will fire on the 4 column. And so he will roll a 1. No effect there. We will next roll for the MiG-23. He's on the 3 column. We get a 6 there. So he is shot down and halved. So really nothing to do with the halved at this point. So he is going to head down to the shot down box. And now this is where we get to carry out round 2. Since there's no top cover for this US A-10, the MiG-23 gets to take a crack at it. So he will roll. We get a +1 for the second round. So we will roll on the 3 column, add 1 to it. And so we'll roll and get a 6. So that becomes a 7. The A-10 is shot down immediately. So he will head back to the shot down box. Our MiG-23 then can return to the flown box. All right, so now that we've moved everybody back to the flown and shot down boxes, we've got our Su-17. He's going to carry out his attack, but we first need to roll for air defense fire. All right, so we roll for air defense fire. We get a 4, so no effect there. So he gets 2 column shifts. So our 3-to-1 odds will become 5-to-1. There's no isolation. Nobody's gotten behind him. So we will roll a 5-to-1 and we get a 6. Now, 6 is an exchange. So for an exchange, the way that works is the defending unit is eliminated. He's got a defense factor of 10. So that would mean the attackers then have to give up an attack rating equivalent to a 10. And then the attackers also each have to take a disruption. And so since he's a 10, we've got a 9 and a 7. Got a 7, a couple 9s, 2 7s, a 9 and a 6. So we can get to 10 in a couple ways. But one of the things we're not going to do, I think, is the Pact. We don't want to give up our air mobile brigade. So we're not going to do like a 9 plus him, because that air mobile zone of control and the ability to basically move 1 hex per movement point makes them pretty valuable. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to give up 14 points. And so we're going to eliminate Czech 20th Motorized Rifle Division and the 3rd Motorized Rifle Division. And then we will reduce the proficiency of each of these stacks. And so somebody gets to advance. Now, one of the things, we're not in a major city. If you're in a major city, you can ignore a retreat result. Obviously, that doesn't apply here for an exchange, but a minor city doesn't have any kind of special ability to have units keep their spot. So we're going to take these guys and move them there. We will stop there because we want to keep them right there around this attack helicopter regiment. So that takes care of the combat phase and the first part of the Pact First Impulse. So we now move to the second part of the Pact First Impulse, which is basically the same thing. We'll go on and get rid of the moved indications from our advances. Now the thing is, with the second sub impulse, it's a breakthrough phase. So only units that aren't in a Pact zone of control can move or attack during this sub impulse. All right, so we're going to go on and move a few of these guys. Nope, 5. We can only go there because we've got 2 movement points here in hex 1318, so we've got to stay there. This hex here in front of it, hex 1718, that's a mountain. That will cost 2 movement points for an air mobile, and most other units are prohibited from entering a mountain terrain. So we're going to head down here to 1618. All right, so we've got these guys up here who are not in a zone of control. So we're going to move. And again, that's all we can do. Now, any unit can move at least 1 hex, even if they don't, as long as it's not prohibited terrain, but they can move 1 hex, even if it's more than their movement cost. But this would be 1, 2, 3 to go in the zone of control, If we would want to go one more hex, we would have to pay 2 to come out of it, 2 to go in it, and 1 for the hex. So that would be too many movement points. So we can only go this one hex. We're not going to do any combat because we've only got like a 22 to 15. We don't want to do a 1-to-1 attack. Same thing up here. Not really conducive to attack. So next we get to the regroup phase. Now the way the regroup phase works, I mentioned earlier, NATO units can regroup and gain back all of their proficiency. Pact units cannot gain back their first proficiency loss. If a unit didn't move or attack in the entire impulse, they can regroup, which would mean they would gain 1 proficiency level back. We don't have anybody in that situation, so we will skip that for now. All right, so next we'll move on to the NATO Reserve Impulse. NATO Reserve Impulse units which don't begin the impulse in an enemy zone of control can move or attack in this impulse. So it pretty much follows the same pattern. There's a movement phase, a combat phase, and then a regroup phase. We're not split into the two. So essentially, the Pact has 4 opportunities to move and attack in a game turn. NATO units have 3. Again, that represents the different doctrine of the different sides. So we're going to start with NATO movement, 5th Panzer Division. We're going to move him up. The 1st Mechanized Division, we're going to move him up also. We're going to go right to here, kind of form our line. French 2nd, we're going to go up here and get with our West German unit. Next, we'll go with the Canadian 4th Mechanized Brigade. We're going to try to move them up here and fill in the gap a little bit. We're going to avoid this zone of control at 1514 because we don't want to pay the extra point to go in there. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and then 4 for the hex, and then 5 for the zone of control. So we're going to move him there. West German 10th Panzer, go right up here, 1, 2, 3, and then 4. We got to get some of these French units back here. The French 7th Armored Division, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, as we're going across the river, so major river, so add 1. That's as far as he can go. The 5th Armored Division, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The 4th Air Mobile, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, they don't have to pay anything for the major river, so we're going to go there. We're going to end up stacking. All right, the French 1st Attack Helicopter, we're going to move him up. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the 1st Armored Cavalry, we're going to move him up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 3rd, we're going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And since he's there, we're going to take a little more powerful 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment and move him up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so that's all we're going to move for now. There's obviously some more units up here to the north that we're not dealing with at this point that would move in a regular scenario. Now, I mentioned stacking. You can stack a total of 10 stacking points in a hex. There are some limitations when you get to swamps and wilderness, mountain passes, where there are less stacking points available, but you can stack 10. Now, for the Pact, they can have units of the same army in a hex without a penalty. But if you would add a different army, you would then have a 3 stacking point penalty for that hex. So that means you would only be able to stack 7. And so again, for the Pact, it's not by country, it's by army. So here, we've got all the First Guards tank army. We couldn't have anyone from a different army group stack with them because that would take us over our 7. Now we could have like the Second Western Front Air Mobile. Since they're not part of an army, they have the white NATO box. They can stack without penalty. For NATO, it's a little different. It's not on an army level, it's by country level. So any NATO countries stacking together, there's the 3 stacking point penalty per hex. So we're going to look at combat, and it doesn't really look like there's any combat we want to do with our units that moved. So we're going to skip that. Regroup, we don't have anybody not in the zone of control that hasn't moved during this impulse, so we will skip that. So the Pact second impulse, actually exactly the same as the first impulse. There is not, you don't receive new units, but you do everything else the same. So we can move, we can do air transport, airborne assault, naval transport, any kind of those things. Then we do combat. And then again, we would then go into the sub impulse where units not in the zone of control can move or attack. All right, so we're going to attempt another airborne assault with our checks here, and we're going to try to go here to 1714, kind of get behind these guys. Now, I didn't mention there is a cost in air transport points on the unit identification player aid. There's an air transport cost, ATC. Usually it's 1 for your airborne units per stacking point. Now with an airborne assault, you have to double it, so it would cost you 2 stacking points. Neglected to do this on the first one. We're going to go on and pull up the Warsaw Pact air transport points available in this scenario. So we should have done 2 for the first one in the first impulse, and we'll do another 2. So we're down to 11 air transport points for the Pact. Okay, so for the airborne assault, we're going to, again, we can provide escorts for that. Pact is doing a MiG-23 and a MiG-27. NATO's countering with a Tornado G. And so those will be our air superiority units. So we will both attack on the 3 column for the Tornado and the MiG-23, the 1 for the MiG-27. 3s is the same, so that's simultaneous. So we will attack the MiG-23 versus the Tornado G. He rolls a 1 on the 3 column, so no effect. Tornado G versus the MiG-23, he gets a 6. So he's shot down and halved. The MiG-27 does get to attack the Tornado G. That's a no effect with the 3, so no effect there. All right, so we still have our escort for the airborne unit, so there's no round 2 of air combat, so we will send our guys back to the flown box. All right, so we will roll for air defense fire on our AA column +1 since he is dropping into an enemy zone of control. So we will roll, we get a 5 +1, that gives us a 6. That's an A2D, so that means aborted and 2 disruptions. So he's not going to complete the drop, and we are going to reduce his proficiency by 2. So he is down to 4. All right, so we're going to go on and move some of our units again. We had some units in Hungary that I forgot to show the movement on, so they're back up to where they should be. Actually, we've got 1 more unit to move, and we will move him up there. So that completes our moves for the second Pact impulse. Now we would go to the combat phase. All right, so we're recentered again. Now the Pact has declared their attacks for the second impulse. So we've got a 3-1, a 4-1, and a 10-1 or more. So we've got some decent odds attack, and 1 could be blowout. So we're going to start down here, kind of the same as we had the other high odds attack. High odds attack, there's not going to be any air for this, so we're going to go on and eliminate him because we would roll on the 10-1 column. All the results are defender eliminated. We will do our advance after attack. We're just going to move the Central Front Air Mobile Unit. We're going to go 1 space. We could go 2, but we're just going to go 1. Our next one, our attack here on the 1st Armored Division. We've got 4-1 odds. So we're going to do air combat here, and we're going to say that we had an A-10 that got through combat, and air defense fire. So he's going to provide a 4 column shift. So we are going to reduce him 4-1, 3, 2. All right, so 1-1 odds, we are going to get a 2. So that means 2 disruptions for the attackers. All right, so we've got 2 disruptions for the attackers, so we will reduce all their proficiencies. And that's all that happens. So the 1st Armored Division holds. And we will move up here to our 5th Panzer Division. We're not going to provide any ground attack for the Pact, and we're going to do the same for NATO. So we're just going to carry this one out at 3-1 odds. We roll a 5, and we get a 2DR, which would be 2 disruptions, and a retreat. Now, retreat, you always retreat 2 hexes, no matter the terrain. You can't retreat into impassable, prohibited terrain for your mobility class, and you can't retreat into a neutral country. So we will move him back. We're going to go 1, and then we're going to come down 1. And again, we have to have at least 1 unit advance. And there's only, since it's a wood plus rough, we can only go 1 hex. So we will move him there. We may do something different. We're just kind of leaving this the 2nd Panzer Grenadier Division, since he's kind of out of the picture for now. So maybe not the best strategy as things are laid out on the board, but you get the idea. All right, so now we will move to the 2nd sub-impulse for the Pact. This is where units outside of a zone of control can move. So we really don't have any Pact units that are outside a zone of control. So it's really important for the Pact, this is more a strategy thing, is to take advantage of your echelons. They allow you to do multiple attacks in a turn. So it's always a good idea if you can have some guys laid back, kind of behind the line, can move up and attack in the 2nd sub-impulse of the 1st and 2nd impulse. So that will conclude that. So the 2nd echelon sub-impulse, we really don't have anybody. We've got a couple units back here. And actually, I think we're going to go on and move these guys up here to kind of fill in the line a little bit more. So that takes us to the NATO segment. NATO gets basically 2 identical impulses. They're not split up like the Pact, as I mentioned before. They're just a full move, combat, and regroup. So NATO actually gets 3 chances to regroup in a turn. The Pact only gets 2. And again, that's representative of the doctrine of the different sides. So for the NATO segment, we start. First thing we do is remove strike markers left from this phase last turn. The next thing we do, Pact declares strikes and escorts. And I should have mentioned, when I put this strike marker here back in the first part of the Pact turn, there's Pact strike markers and NATO. The Pact have red numbers, NATO have blue. That doesn't mean the strikes were carried out by that side. It means which phase they were in. Because you can have air units perform strikes in either segment. So outside of the first turn, when NATO can't, NATO could perform strikes in the Pact segment, and the Pact can perform strikes in the NATO segment. But we're not going to go on and do any more strikes for the Pact because we're getting kind of low on units. So we will go on and start the NATO 1st impulse. That would be the movement phase, the combat, and the regroup. So again, we receive new units first. We will receive one of our units, the 4th Mechanized Division, appears at a Pomkis. Now, I didn't mention this, that Pomkis, in the Battle for Germany, there are 3 locations. The NATO player chooses which unit he wants to receive at each location. That's not visible to the Pact. But we know that this one here is the 4th Mechanized Division. So we're going to go on and receive the 4th Division there. Didn't work out quite for the Pact. They were gambling that it would be here in 1808. They were hoping for the strike, which would get 2 strikes on the NATO unit, as it appears, but that's not to be. For the reinforcements, the first thing we have is the 4th Division appears here at the Pomkis site. We can take away the Pomkis marker and just replace it with the 4th Mechanized counter. The other thing we need to do is, for the new units, is check for territorials. NATO has territorial units which appear in cities in their own country, and they are not allowed to leave the country. But there is a mechanism to decide when those territorial units are received. And so what you do is you roll a die for each unit, and they would appear if the die roll is equal to or less than the game turn. So game turn 1, units will appear on a die roll of 1. Okay, so we've got 6 West German territorials. We're going to say we rolled 1-1. And so we will have one of our territorials appear. All right, so we had 1 German territorial appear, 14th here, landed in Augsburg, so that's where they came from. Now, also for territorials, the NATO player does need to roll for neutrals. Some neutrals have territorials. Austria, in this case, does. So even though they haven't joined the war and they're still neutral, you still roll for territorials to appear every game turn. So we will roll again, and we're going to assume we rolled a 1-1 out of our 8 for the Austrian units. And so we've got a unit that appears here in Salzburg. So that takes care of our new units. And next we will move our units. All right, so we've completed our movement. We're not going to move some of the guys in back, but we have moved, some of the guys up front to kind of fill in the line. The West German First Geb Panzer Grenadiers have moved back to 1 hex to try to kind of form the lineup, and hopefully they don't get isolated out here. All right, but we've still got a little bit of movement to do. We've got one more unit. We've got our first armored division that has 1 disruption. He won't be able to regroup this impulse, but he will be able to do it in the second impulse if he stays out of a Pact zone of control. So we're going to move him. He's got pay 2 for leaving the zone of control, 1 for going in. So 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we will move him there. He's moved this impulse, so he won't be able to regroup. But hopefully for the second impulse, well, and there's no more Pact movement, so he should be able to regroup in the second impulse. So next we would go to our combat phase. No combats to carry out at this point for NATO. There's still not a lot here. Counter attacks are something for NATO that the timing has to be right and the odds have to be right. Low odds attack can end up causing more problems than not attacking. So that's just another little strategy piece for it. All right, so next we move on to the second impulse. We will unmark our moved units. And so we will move a few more NATO units up. All right, so we've completed our movement. We've just moved a few more units up to the front lines. So we'll take care of that. Combat, no more combat for NATO, but now we go to the regroup phase. And so here we have the 1st Armored Division. As I mentioned, we moved them back the last impulse. They haven't moved at all this impulse, so they can gain back 1 proficiency. And this represents the addition of additional assets to the unit. And so he's back at full strength and full proficiency, which again, Pact can't gain back that last 1. So that would take us to the final segment. Okay, so after the NATO second impulse, we move to the final segment. And there's just a couple steps in this segment. The first thing we do is the aircraft landing phase. Here we take units that were in the air superiority box and move them to the flown box. And this represents that, they were up providing, escort or top cover or something outside of the scope of transactions in the game. So we're going to just move those into the flown box for the NATO, same for the Pact. It doesn't matter what order you do these in. You can also run transfer missions at this point. The Pact would transfer first, and that takes care of the aircraft landing phase. Anything that's in the available box, those are assumed that didn't fly, so they will stay where they are. And a lot of this gets resolved in the aircraft maintenance phase of the second game turn. That's where we consolidate losses, check for maintenance, handle craters and destroyed on runway. And we will talk about that at on a separate Learn to Play. So the other parts of the final segment are the unsupplied grounded recovery phase. We don't have any grounded units. No units are unsupplied, so we can skip that. There's the overland communications phase, which is only part of the Balkan Entente scenario, and then nuclear escalation phase, which we skip. So that takes care of 1 game turn for Third World War. I hope this was helpful to everyone. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully, this will help you, work through some of the mechanisms of the game. It's really pretty easy. It looks like a lot, but follow the expanded sequence of play. That really is your guide to making things successful. Have fun out there and good gaming.